Good evening. There's a phrase from a Greek philosopher, and I can't remember exactly the name or the context, but he says something like, happy is he who knows he's happy. And this brings me to the fact, this takes me to the fact, the idea that most of our mood, most of our mood, if we're happy, we're sad, if we're angry, or whatever the mood that we feel, it depends on it depends on one hand on the situation we find ourselves in. It depends also on our physical state of being, but it depends mostly on our mental state of being. It's a kind of balance. We've explained this different many times. So we have a kind of scale, so we have the environment, the situation that we find itself, and then on the other side we have our body, the physical state of being, and in the middle is our mental state of being. What happens is when we lose that balance, if that scale is flexible, then it's able to maintain that balance. But if that central pillar is not stable, then it can fall from one side to the next very easily. In other words, when there's situations or the, when the situation is healthy, or if we're or if we have a healthy body or healthy environment but with a sick mind, living it's like living paradise as if it were hell. Instead, if the environment is polluted or the body is sick or maybe even both, but if the mind is healthy, if it's balanced, is fine, then one is able to find that balance. And at that point, we can say it's like living heaven in hell. The situations are difficult, but one is fine. And giving an example, as a story I really like a lot. It's a true story. Unfortunately, I always confuse names, but this was the master of a friend that I met once in Nepal. About um, so 8 months ago, I was actually also in Nepal, and I met this monk, and he told me this story. So we're in the 1960s in the north of India, just not too long after most Tibetans fled Tibet to India. So there's a mountainous area near the forest in the north of India, a kind of cavern, a kind of cave, and this monk was this monk was meditating, and his disciples would come and bring toasted barley. So so the Tibetans eat this a lot, this toasted barley that you can then grind, add water, and then you can eat it. And he was every 6 months or so they would bring him food. One day they see that he's not in his cave, that things were left as if he were supposed to come back at any moment, but he wasn't there. They were there for over a week waiting for him. And then they thought, well, maybe he went to get water or to get wood, and then it was killed by a wild animal. I mean, there were tigers, there were enormous snakes. It was a dangerous area. So they went back to the monastery, Baksa, in the north of India, where all the monks who had arrived from Tibet, the 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 Indian government had offered this ex-prison. Actually, even Mahatma Gandhi had been in prison there. So this abandoned prison became the home to all the monks, a couple thousand monks who had come um, from Tibet. So they went back and they did all the necessary ceremonies for their deceased master. And actually, what happened, he went walking to get water, whatever it was, and then he was taken by the Indian, the secret services of the Indian army, thinking that he was a Pakistani spy. He had very long hair, because when monks do a long retreat, there's this tradition to not cut their hair until they finished. So here he was, walking around in the forest with long hair, dressed as he would have been dressed. He didn't speak any Hindi, didn't speak any English. So they brought him back to um, um, and they interrogated him. I don't think they were very kind with him, and they they put him in jail. And after a few days, he realized that he was protected from the rain, the elements. Twice a day, they were bringing him food, and he thought, "I'm so lucky." And he just meditated. I imagine that the face of the guardians of this man would spend 12, 14 hours a day meditating. And he stayed like that for 2 years. After 2 years, at a certain point, they came to him and they said, you can go. They opened up the gates of the jail and the prison, and he said, no, 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 and he runs back in. He says, I haven't finished my retreat. I can't leave. And so they took him out, and he ran back in, and they took him out, and they ran back in, and at a certain point, they were a little desperate. They prepared a bed for him in an area of the prison where he could leave if he wanted to. And they left him there, and he stayed for another 2 years. And he would, I mean, this is India, of course, so spirituality is lived differently. It's not, I mean, it's someone who's there meditating, it's something that is acceptable. No, it's after 4 years, and he got up, he thanked them, and he left, and he walked back to his original monastery, and they saw him. It looked like he had come back from the dead. I mean, they were all sure that he had been killed 4 years prior. And what does this story tell us? That first of all, I mean, what would have happened if this had happened to one of us? Total tragedy. Because the fear, what are they doing? This isn't right. I was there with, doing my own retreat. What, I have nothing to do with being a spy in Pakistan. Call the embassy. Uh, Imagine nobody calls anyone, and you're there. Instead of being on retreat, one familiarizes oneself with fear or anxiety. Instead, instead of what a wonderful opportunity I have. And this brings me this concept that beyond the situation that we find ourselves in, there are physical characteristics, hunger and cold and heat, let's call them physical, objective aspects. But how big is the influence of our mind over how we live this situation? From 0 to 10, 3, 8, at least 8, no? Right? So, and this is an example of a situation that most of us would have lived very badly, and he lived it very, very well. And when they said he could leave, he wanted to stay. He was fine. He was really well there. And this brings us to an important concept for our happiness, our state of well-being. The more conditions that we have, the more conditions we construct for our happiness, the more fragile we become. I'm sure that I'm sure that no one who is here lives in a prison or can't explain anything to anyone, is there forced to be there. But at the same time, we also have situations that are not the way we'd like them to be. Surely there are situations we like and situations that we don't. But do we have the conditions to be happy uh, on a material level? Are we cold, or do we not have food to eat? Do we can we not face or cure our pain or sickness? Or is our happiness based on how we're living that situation at the moment? There are two fundamental aspects. One aspect has to do with, how can I say, we have this enormous attachment to an idealized image of how things should be. I have my image, you know, it's, done very well, also how I think, the image of myself and the images of others too. But what happens when the image and reality don't correspond? What happens when this situation is not as we think it should be? Normally, we're upset. Normally, we say there's something wrong. This shouldn't be like this. Why? Oh, because it's because it's not good for me. It's not convenient for me because it would be better if it were like this or like that. But this is coming from my perspective, not from someone else's. But we grasp on this idealized image of how people, situations, how they should be, how we expect them to be. And when they don't correspond, it means that there's something wrong. I don't know has ever I don't know if someone has ever told you you shouldn't be like this. If it's ever happened to you. I mean, what would we say? What do we say if someone says that to us? I'm sorry, but if I am like this, is life brought me to be like this? I'm sorry for you if you don't like how I am, but I am how I am, right? But if we say this to someone else, to the other, if we were to say this to someone else, they would answer in the same way. So, reality is rarely what we expect. It's rarely do things go the way we want them to go. Rarely do people correspond to the image we have of them, how things should be, in our opinion. So there's a fundamental attitude that I think of as a kind of humbleness. So to say how things should go is a form of 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 arrogance. Like, I know how things should go. Well, who am I who am I to say how you should be or how things should go? I mean, the most I could say would be, in my opinion, it would be better if things were like this. But so there's a humility, humbleness to look out onto the world and not project onto situations and onto others how how we think things should be. If we're able to do this already, we have great freedom because something that terribly conditions us and creates frustration, aversion, and many shades of suffering is this attachment to how we think things should go, and then that transforms into how things should have gone. I mean, 30 years go by and we're still suffering because that time there you said this instead of doing that, because you did this instead you should have done that, because this happened and that should have never happened in this way, and look at what happened to me after, and one stays just trapped in that. So we re-suffer the past. And then we have this fear that the future is not going to correspond to that idealized image that we have. And if things don't go the way I expect them, well, for sure they're not going to go the way you expect them. And if something happens, for sure something else is going to happen. The problem isn't if something happens. The problem is, do I have the means to face this? And if things don't all go right, it's impossible for everything to go right. I don't know if you've ever seen everything perfectly right. No? This is hardly ever. It may be hard for that to happen. I know people from all walks of life. I've met marvelous people, and I've never seen everything go perfectly well for them too. I mean, there are always problems, difficulties, things go in one way, they go in another. And if we live to this attachment of how things should go, so then we re-suffer the past, we pre-suffer the future. And if this happens, and if that goes like that, and if this is not like that, and etc., and one worries about how things could go. And these states of being take up so much take up so much space, generate so much malaise and suffering. So a fundamental point is to have this humbleness where we see people, situations, places, and we know how to respect every situation, every person for what he is, the situation for what it is, which doesn't, which means I see you for what I'm able to see. I'd like you to be different, sure. I'd like you to be different, but I don't impose onto you this obligation, this need to be this different. You know, oh, I would like you to not do these stupid things. So what do? I try to interact with you in the best way possible so that gradually you can change your point of view or your way of being. But I don't impose onto you my ideas of how you should be or how you shouldn't be. One thing is having an idealized view. Um, One thing is having an idealized view of a person, of a place, that, without having that, with that obligation, that imposition onto other. I mean, it's beautiful to have an idealized image of of things, but without having that arrogant expectation that that's how they should be. If we're able to free ourselves from this, it brings so much freedom, really helps us so much. Because just to complicate things slightly, we have an idealized image of a certain situation, of a certain person, and so I create, let's say I create an idealized image of Devadatta or whoever, you know. But what happens if, what happens if, you know, I have an idealized image of two people. One is my father, one is my brother. I have an idealized image of of what a father should be. And what happens if my father doesn't correspond to this idea I have of what a father should be? Um, oh, you shouldn't be like this. You're my father. A father should be like, should do this, that, and the other shouldn't do this. Or a mother, or a mother, or a sister, or a husband, or wife, a child. We create these boxes, and we want the people to stay inside those boxes. But these little boxes that we create, they're idealized. It's, it's sometimes I hear, "Oh, this shouldn't happen in the family." Sorry, but if if there's a place where everything can happen, it's in the family. Oh, we shouldn't fight in within the family. Oh, that would be beautiful. It would be much better than fighting. But have you ever seen a family where there was not at some point the conflict? Um, um, so I mean, harmony in among people is like having harmony among all the mental defilements of everyone. I mean, one day someone is more jealous, one day someone is more angry. So we have this idealized image of our of family members, and father, mother, sister, and also friends. And every once in a while, not only do we have this idealized image of the person, but also of the category that the person falls into. And that's heavy. So, one interesting exercise to do is to try to see the person beyond the category that he falls into. First of all, is a person. Well, you're a person, and you're also my father, you're also my mother, you're my wife, you're my friend, whatever it is. But first of all, I see you as a person, with a person with fears, with life, his own traumas. And by it's for some reason or another, you're also my father. I've never seen a perfect father, a perfect mother. Never seen. And which doesn't mean I haven't seen many, many marvelous parents in every different context. So the more attached we are to idealized images of something, the more fragile our happiness becomes. The more we're able to navigate the waves. The waves, I mean to say, the conditions that manifest, the interactions with others, the more we're able to navigate in doing, following the wave, the more solid our happiness is. This is a fundamental aspect. Another aspect that comes together with this, because every once in a while I have this sensation that we have this te- we have this tendency of creating many conditions for our happiness. And it came quite clear to me. And okay, it was in that context, which doesn't mean it was just because of that. I was in I was in Holland, and I had two conferences on the same day in Amsterdam. Once was in the morning. We walked through the park, a beautiful park in the center of the city, and then one in the evening. And as I was walking, at a certain point, we were walking on the road, and there it was the the, um, the very expensive stores, and I felt like, oh, poor people. Really, I felt so sad to see all these luxury stores, to see how we create so many conditions to be happy. This is the perfect little outfit. If there's one thing, one button that's not correct, oh, it's terrible. Instead, you go to Nepal, you know, um, it you go to even a seamstress in Nepal, and you say, oh, okay, well, this 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 jacket it doesn't have this doesn't close. Oh, no, no, that's just the model. Or just to say that they're not um they don't make so they make problems about it, you know. So the more conditions that we depend on to our happiness, the more fragile our happiness becomes, you know. So this one doesn't treat me with respect, and this one didn't talk to me in this way, and or this is not in the right position. But if we, but really, what kind of conditions do we set up for our happiness? Very often, many. It's important for me also live experiences where even without these conditions, we can still be happy. I've had many experiences like this when we were in the Amazon or in Tibet, places where the conditions that for us normally are fundamental, like privacy or have my own bedroom for sleeping. Instead, I remember once we were in Tibet, we got to this monastery, NgalSo Rinpoche, like 5,000 meters. Everyone was already a little bit confused, and there were so many people on that trip, and there were big, big rooms with about 15 people per room, but literally you couldn't put a suitcase between um, one person or another. It was just one mattress attached to a next, you know, and there are also those who had to sleep in the corridor. I I slept in a room with Rinpoche. There were four of us, but there was only one bathroom. Not just one bathroom, but this bathroom, bagno, sorry, bathroom. There was no running water, and then there was to get to the bathroom. Okay, there's a bathroom in the morning early when you got up outside because there was kind of this covered terrace. And, there were these rooms where there was a Rinpoche and I was sleeping, and then there were these other rooms, and then there was just outside, and then there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that were lining up to get to Rinpoche. They wanted his blessings before dawn, and before 400 500 people didn't receive their blessing, they didn't leave. um, we were there for we were there for 5 days, and he gave blessings to over 7,000 people from morning to night. But in the morning you wake up, there's only one bathroom, and to get there you have to really like just elbow your way, and there's the big Tibetan men there who don't even move a centimeter to get you, and then you push out, the door to get to this one bathroom. I mean, was difficult, but after those days, no one wanted to leave. No one complained about the bathroom or anything. It, I mean, it was superfluous. But many people who were there said that it was the most beautiful days of their lives, that they were really happy. So what happens is when our being is nourished in other ways, the conditions those conditions that we normally expect become superfluous. But when we expect those conditions constantly, when they're missing, it seems that something's wrong, and that's the reason why we're not happy. I can't be happy because this is missing, or because I don't have this, or and so we're constantly creating and adding conditions for our own happiness. And this is something that I invite everyone to look at this for yourself. What are my minimum conditions for my happiness? It might seem silly and banal, but there's this practice called the eight Mahayana practices, these vows that are taken for 24 hours. And among the various vows, um, one of the like lesser vows, but it's given so much more importance, is to not eat after noon. I mean, you eat you eat midday, and then you don't eat until the following morning. It's quite now it's trendy to do something like that, to have this intermittent fasting. But before, um, pe people would take these vows and or would want to take these vows and ask me, well, what do I do if I get hungry? Well, if you're hungry, you stay hungry. So what do you want? Are you gonna are you gonna are you gonna die because you're a little hungry one day, half a day? Nothing's gonna happen. So this is one of these conditions that we set up for ourselves. We also we're afraid of getting tired, of working hard. We're afraid of being in difficult situations or uncomfortable situations. This is something that takes up a great inner space. I saw when I was a child, we when I when I took many trips in India, I mean, it was very normal, to get on a bus and stay on that bus for 16 hours without ever knowing, when we were supposed to arrive. And instead, when one sets up conditions, so, so the more comfortable our situation is, the more comfort we need, more and more and more, to reach that level of satisfaction and happiness or comfort. It's important for each one of us to reflect, to observe what are the conditions that I set up for my happiness. Th- And from these conditions, what are what are the ones that are feasible and which ones are idealized? Because let me just give you an example. When we when we have a project, when we have a project, we want things to go well, right? It it can go that that something happens that we weren't expecting. It can happen. There are difficulties that we hadn't expected, but also, maybe we don't even think that it's fair what's happening, that those things happen. Or it can happen that can it happen that everything goes perfectly fine? No, at least from my experience. But when something happens that we see as unjust, or something wrong, or is not as we had expected, not something positive, etc., etc. There's a part, there's the energy, time, resources, necessary to face that situation. And then there's all the space that takes up inside of us in generating aversion, negating it, anger, etc., etc., disappointment. And very often, that inner space that that is taken up wi- from not accepting the disappointment, etc., in front of that situation is much greater than the actual energy and resources that we need to face the situation. Is that clear? I've been thinking about this over the last few days because it's a little bit like I had this experience in these days where I arrived. It's like you take a long walk and finally get there and say, but as many of you know, we, 3 years working on the temple, enormous work, and at the end, there's um, we've been fined, or we've been so from the city. So okay, if for things I didn't even know existed, didn't exist. So we need to take a lawyer. We need to go through it all. It's a situation where, in the end, I'm happy. I'm happy for two reasons. First of all, there's nothing to fear because we always did everything with coherence. But I'm also convinced that um, somehow difficulties, or what we call interferences, they have to manifest somewhere. There's also a Tibetan proverb that says, one of Lama Gangchen, one of his masters, Tso Rinpoche, would say that when something is very beautiful, something beautiful happens, it's always accompanied by something bad. I- And observing in my own life, once I was talking with Geshe-lon Samputsuk, who was here last Wednesday, talking to Geshe-la, I said every time that there's something really beautiful and important out of something extraordinary, there's always some kind of interference, something out of place. And he said that proverb, also telling a few stories and observing, well, there are times where, that if a problem is arising, it's a good sign that something really important and beautiful is happening, because there are certain people, certain situations that um, that 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 are kind of like um, they're the ones who take the lightning, So what does that mean? That there in our life there can be problems, there can be conflicts. Diffic- it's very rare for reality to correspond to to our expectations. But there are three types of interferences. There there are external interferences, w- th- things that are outside. So how other people behave, or spirits even, or the environment, the context in which we find ourselves. We have inner interferences that have to do with our own feelings, anxiety, anger, sadness, inner states of beings that don't allow us to reach a certain state or do something. It's an interference that doesn't allow us to do what we want to do or be what we want to be. So, so inner interferences are inner states of being mostly, but even with the external interferences, there are two types. There are external interferences, like in a family, for example. if there's a problem outside the family, the, a neighbor, an external interference internal is when there's the problem in the family. It's external because it's not in you, but it's within the family. So if there's a strong conflict within the family, a strong conflict within the family is harder to resolve than a strong conflict outside the family, because normally when there's a conflict outside the family, within the family they become more united. And then there are secret interferences, things that appear as being positive but actually don't allow someone to reach something or do something. For example, if I look for an example, my objective is to take a trip to go from here to Mount Kailash, and something beautiful, something positive what I'm doing. As I'm preparing for the trip, something beautiful happens to me. I'm invited to go a week in Sardinia. That's wonderful. But it's the opposite direction. I go to Sardinia. And Sardinia is absolutely beautiful. I go to Sardinia, but that becomes interference to going to Mount Kailash. So it's something that seems positive, but it's actually an interference to realizing something else. In and of itself, it's not something negative, but it becomes an interference to to my other um, my other um, objective. A classic story that explains this, so maybe a little harder to understand. The story of an important master called Bhutan Kamche Tempa. He had an enormous um, uh, amount of knowledge. He knew so much at a certain point of his life where he, when he wanted to meditate and elaborate all this knowledge, someone came to him and brought him paper and pen, ink. And he saw that as a sign that he should write. And he started writing everything that he knew. And he wrote 100+ volumes. And he actually made a small stupa. He knew so much he wasn't able to write it all down himself. So he made this small monument, this stupa, and he had four different scribes at every corner, and he would do circumambulations around the stupa, and at each corner he would dictate one sentence to one of the scribes, and so he was writing four books at the same time, and he spent great part of his life like this. And after his death, some masters would highlight the fact that at that great level of knowledge that where he had reached, if he had spent the rest of his life meditating, he would have gotten out of a cycle of suffering. But so in the writing down of everything he knew was something positive, but was also an interference, to something even greater. Well, what happens though? What's the real danger? Is seeing interference not as an interference, but as something to follow. For example, in a relationship with someone, regardless of what it is. So, our objective, do we want to have a conflictual relationship or a harmonious relationship? I'm just asking. Theoretically, we want to have a harmonious relationship. So, in the middle of this relationship, a feeling of anger or jealousy or envy comes out. does that take me towards, does that take us towards harmony or to conflict? It's an interference to. But if I don't see the interference as an interference, but I see it as something to follow, at that point I'm trapped. When we see anger normally, do we recognize anger as an interference, something to eliminate, to oppose, to stop, etc.? Or we see it as something to follow? Often, anger comes, what do? We follow it. The same thing with jealousy, with envy, with fear, etc. So, when an interference is seen as an interference, it means that one won't nourish it anymore, feed it anymore. It's something instead to block. If we can see, there's some images here in this Tibetan iconography that just shows um, um, the irate beings. This shows this force of opposition because an interference should be treated as such. It should not be fed. And instead, if I see it as an interference, I don't give it importance. I block it. It because if I just need to see it as something that's keeping me from going where I want to go. This reminds me just a little interesting, a side story that connects a little bit to what I said before. My mother told me once that not too much long after she had gotten married to my father, and her family had organized a family trip to the sea. It wasn't, let's say, the most balanced context for the whole family. At a certain point, my mother and father started fighting, and he realized. He said, "Wait, in this moment, let's not fight. But after the trip, we can see. But in this moment, there's so much tension here within the family. Let's just try something. You you treat me as the you treat me as the best man in the world. I'll treat you as the best woman in the world. But let's not let this tension um, show up. Let's see what happens." And so they were about to go into the conflict, to have the conflict, and then they they took this as a kind of game, actually. And then in other parts of the family, among other people in the family, a huge conflict exploded. There can be times where there's so much tension and that needs to come out. But when we realize that there's a situation like this, one key is to see the interference as an interference. In other words, I'm not going to get into conflict. I'm not going to feed the conflict. I'm going to recognize it like an energy. If I have this container and there's pressure inside, at some point that pressure needs to come out. And if I see that if it comes out, we let that pressure come out, but without letting it explode, trying to without trying to increase the pressure. Sometimes we just need to let it out a little bit. Are you following? Do you see this? Yes. Because our tendency is to get into that dynamic. There's some tension, and one gets overwhelmed with that tension. It gets into the fight, gets into the jealousy, whatever it is. And then the problem is that once that once that pressure that needed to get out is out, but one is still linked to everything that he did and said, and one thing leads to another, and it's very, very difficult and tiresome. Instead, one sees something as an interference. I don't know. Two people are together. At a certain point, there's tension. There's something. There's something happening, and we recognize it as an interference. How can we pacify this? There are four ways to do this. Every time that there's a conflict, there are four ways to face this, and they're even represented here on the ceiling, which are the four main colors. Let's start in the east, which is white. When there's conflict, the first thing to do is try to pacify. How can we pacify a situation? I myself, I go to pacify. I am in a state of calm and peace, balance. I go towards where there's conflict and I try to influence the situation um, with my own mood. I try to calm. I try to, to pacify. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But the first level is, when there's the conflict, we try to pacify it. Obviously, first of all, I should not nourish the conflict, not get into the conflict. But not only do I not enter into conflict, I try to pacify it. It's interesting to see that to pacify a conflict, the one who pacifies needs to already be in at peace with himself. Have you ever have you ever I don't know if it's ever happened that you've tried to calm someone down being even more nervous than the one who's upset? Baby, relax, be calm down. Normally that doesn't happen. It doesn't work. Instead, if there's a moment of tension, situation of tension, and who comes, who's really in a state of balance, then that influence is able to pacify the situation. Sometimes, even if when someone is at peace and tries to pacify situations, sometimes the conflict is stronger and is not able. And at that point, there's that second action represented here in the south, colored yellow, this power of increase. I'm not able to pacify the conflict, but I'm able to increase something positive. So I am not going to talk about the subject. I'm not going to try to pacify that, but I'm going to put energy into something else that is beautiful, pleasurable, positive. And the other person coming into contact with that, positive and pleasurable, can disconnect from that conflict that can gradually become pacified. So, okay, there's a conflict, we're not able to pacify it. Let's go eat something delicious. I know people, for example, when there were conflicts, they would go bicycling together or go taking a walk together or um, doing something, they would do something pleasurable. So we increase something positive, beautiful. We put energy into something pleasurable and positive, and I take away the tension from the conflict to then to melt it, to pacify it. Every once in a while, that's not enough. And at this point, we need to go to the third action, which goes in crescendo. Here we're in the west in red colored. It's called the action. It's often translated as power but I think it's influence or seduction, control. I'm not able to pacify you. I'm not able to take you on a different road to show you something beautiful. Um, you know, You want me to go eat with you? I don't want to eat anything with you. Okay, but I'm going to try to seduce you. Seduction comes through two different ways. Seduction, it can be done with like a kind of prize. Like if you stop doing this, then you're going to have this. Oh, okay, yeah, that would work for me. So I'm not giving you something. I'm seducing you so that to get you um, to get you to in a different way. And the second road is be careful. As a warning, is a warning. If you keep doing this is going to happen. Um, so where you're playing with attraction and aversion. I promise you something beautiful, or I threaten you with something negative. This is already, maybe this doesn't even work sometimes with people. Okay, maybe someone says, "Oh, your promises you can keep, and your threats, that's even worse." So then we go the fourth activity in the north, and is green. Here is the action of opposition. Um, there's conflict. There's a strong negative energy of conflict, and I need to generate um, an energy that is the same or greater to oppose that wrathful for the it's also called a wrathful activity. So I'm when I use this wrathful energy, it's not with the intention to harm. For example, if there's someone who's running towards an abyss, if you say, "Oh, that's not good for you. It's better if you stop." That didn't work. Oh, okay, come here. Let's eat something nice. Let's do something, I try to change, or if if you if you start keep running in that direction, you're gonna hurt yourself, or or here, if you run in this direction, I'll give you something nice. If that's not enough, if that person's still running, I'm gonna push that person down to the ground to save them. So we use strength to stop another force, another strength, without the intention of destroying, but with the intention of 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 helping. At the basis, there's love. So destroying that negativity, but not so to stop conflict. It's not always possible to do it through pacification, increase, or seduction. But when we realize that there's an interference, what do we do in front of this interference? Inner or outer? So the secret ones we don't even know. So if inner or outer interferences, first of all, we try to pacify them. If we're able, good. Otherwise, we increase. Let's use an example with ourselves. I see that the relationship I have with someone else, or along my path or at work, whatever it is, I have a feeling that a wrong feeling of anger, jealousy, envy, something that takes me to say or do things that generate conflict. So there's an inner conflict that, I want to have a harmonious relationship, but my inner interference is keeping me from realizing that. So the first step is realizing, identifying that that inner interference as an interference. So let's try to pacify. I don't want to follow that attitude anymore. I don't want to feed it. So I put effort into generating the antidote, the opposite feeling to calm it. It's not enough, maybe. When it's not enough, then I need to put energy into positive things to take away from that negative mind. And when that's not enough, then with ourselves we say, be careful, because if you do like this is going to happen. And instead, if you're able to do like this is going to happen. So here we need, if when that's not enough, we really need to have that strength to oppose our negativities and do what is necessary to oppose that negativity. So this is what we mean when we say seeing an interference as an interference, facing that interference. When we see when we see an interference, we can like a conflict, and we can follow it. We can become overwhelmed by it, or there are interferences that can be they can also be lived as like injustice, um, and we victimize ourselves. But when we victimize ourselves in front of a situation of difficulty or conflict, then our tendency then is to really enter into conflict, to let ourselves um, um, be taken by the situation. On a practical level, we need to resolve the problems that come up. The example from before, like now, obviously, we go to a lawyer. We need to do what we need to do. But one of the more important points is, how can I say? Once a master went to a monk who was in a retreat, and this monk was sitting in retreat. They were alone. He said, "Oh, my dear monk, what are you doing?" He said, "I'm meditating on patience." Oh, really? Oh, wonderful. And then he spat in his face, and he slapped him. And this monk, he got up, he wanted to react, and the master said, "Remember, without an object of anger, you can't practice patience. It's easy to be patient when everything's fine. Nobody's bothering you, you're there, nobody's against you, everything's going more or less how you expect it." When do we really need to practice patience? When when we're faced with difficult situations. And what about compassion or unconditional love in everyday life, in situations that are even most more difficult? Because it's easy, to love those who tell you, oh, how lovely, how beautiful and how great you are. The point is to not get into a feeling of aversion towards those who harm you. This is one of the most important points. But how can I train if 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 I don't find myself in a situation of aversion? As long as I'm not in a situation where someone's hurting me, then it's all theoretical, right? There's a verse. It's one of my most favorite. Let me see if I remember it. Um, when others taken, taken. Were to treat me with treat me badly, with aggressively, physically or verbally. Guys, now I'm a little bit confused, but it says, may I see that person like my supreme guide. And then there's another part of the verse that says, may I take on to me the the loss and offer the victory to others. We can talk about this for hours and hours. Um, our objective and my objective is to be able to get out of our cycle of suffering, get out of our suffering. The situations that we see around us, they're like a mirror that show what's inside. In other words, some time ago, I lived two situations within the same week. One, to generalize, it was a very, very difficult situation, we would say, had to do with death, but I lived it very peacefully. It didn't make me suffer. If you were to ask me, um, you know, you know, if I wanted it to be different, yes, but as it was happening, I didn't have a feeling of malaise or suffering. It didn't create any suffering inside. And a few days later, another situation happened, apparently absolutely banal, but really unbalanced me. And I went to see how come. And I realized when you're in a situation, regardless of what it is, it's as if that situation um, emanates a sound towards us. And if that sound resonates something unresolved, some kind of inner conflict, I live that situation through that past experience. So that situation that should have been, let's say, a difficult situation, it didn't resonate any kind of fear or difficulty or suffering. It was quite neutral. The other situation, no matter how banal it seemed, it really resonated something inside. And so I lived that situation through that feeling that was resonated inside. So when we're in a situation that resonates something unresolved within, and that we can see when we react with aggression, with violence, with resentment, with fear, and other feelings, that means that there's something in there that's resonating. Thank you. Thank you for showing me because now I can face it. Because if I don't see it, when would I be able to face it? Never. One master in our tradition, Pabonka Rinpoche, represented here on this column on facing me. He was a master of the master of Lama Gangchen, Pabonka Dechen Nimpo. He, in one of his texts, he says that mental defilements are easily eliminated when they're manifest. It's similar to a poison in the blood that becomes easily eliminated when it comes out as an infection. It's not pleasurable, but at that point you can take out the poison, but as long as it's just running through your veins unseen, you can't take it out. So our aversion or our fear or our anger, negative emotions, as long as they're not manifest, as long as they're hidden inside, it's difficult to see them, to face them. Instead, when they come to the surface, at that point we really can face them. And what I experience is that some situations of malaise, or being in situations of, let's simplify, let's just say, difficult situations, or aggression towards me, these people, these situations allow me to look inside and see, um, that there, maybe certain behaviors that were starting to arise, and allowing me to really stop them, because I don't want to act with aversion. It's how beautiful is it to be able to actually, to really put into practice what we teach, to patience, altruism. And it's said that past masters, Kadampa masters of the 11th century, between 11th 12th century, they, it's said that when the conditions in their life where they got to a point where nothing would unbalance them, they would look specifically, they would look for extreme situations. Intentionally, they would go for, they would put themselves in situations where people would harm them, look for situations to see if there was something inside that they hadn't seen, so that they could practice more and more love and patience. I say you don't need to go looking for these situations. I imagine that for most of us, there are already unpleasant situations that we face. But how I face these situations is up to me. As we said a couple of weeks ago, when we said, if someone hurts me, the way that person behaves is up to him. But how I face the situation, that's up to me. Not in the sense that I don't care about the other, but I mean, it's his problem, because only he can resolve it. But often we we live the behavior of others as if it were our own problem. Oh, look, you know, what did he do? Shouldn't have said this, shouldn't have done that, and why this and this. I don't know. Who knows? Because within this ignorance, this person thought this was the best way to react, to behave. But how do I interact? And for me, one of the most important things ever is to not separate, to not distinguish our daily life from our spiritual life. A little bit like saying, when you go to the temple, when you come here to the center, when you sit down to meditate, when you study the Dharma, these these are the exceptions of the Dharma practice. These are the moments where we regenerate our strength, we give our direction. But we need to practice Dharma when we're working, when we're with our family, when we're in the middle of traffic, when in in any situation we find ourselves in. That's where we need to practice patience, generosity, humbleness, this this coherence between our thoughts and our actions, peaceful speech. Otherwise, when are we supposed to practice this dharma? No, it's in our daily life, and the opportunities are there. And the most beautiful thing is the situations go by. If I think and look back at very difficult situations that I lived through, or mm, or the people around me, the situations that were difficult for them, I can give you a very long, long list. But these situations, most of them are finished. But the people, those who live these experiences, myself included, we're still here. And what changes is the way we face these situations. One key is regardless of what happens, we should not be taken by anger, by selfishness, by aversion, by fear, but have have our anchors, that which we that we hold on to, our principles, um, our our gratitude, the generosity, our values, our principles, our this is an enormous power. If you see an interference as an interference, but one stays solidly, holding on to one's own values and principles, you let it pass. But the way we react, the way we respond and face these situations shape our being. Um, I remember this story. I was quite a, I was quite young, 1995, 1996. I was 14. It was 14. I was 14 years old. I hadn't seen my mother for a year and a half, and I was taking a trip from Malaysia to Sri Lanka, and Lama Gangchen was giving a conference there, and I was going to accompany him. And I was traveling with mostly Italians. We got to the airport of Colombo in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka. I give my passport, and they look at my passport. They're looking, and they, I asked how many days do I have in my in my visa. He said not even a single day. You can't enter. And um and I said, what am I supposed to do? He said, no, you need to go back to Malaysia. To make a very long story short, we stayed there, and then on the other side of the airport there was like civil war. And my mother was waiting for me at the exit. And have you seen this child? Have you seen this child dressed like this? I mean, you can't miss him. And many people were saying, yes, yes, he's there. You know, um, and then she was asking, where is my son? No, he's not here. And it was a huge scene. And finally, I got this phone call, and I remember that we really had laughed, and we were joking around. And there are those who went. Um, um, so I stayed there for about 18 hours. Some people stayed with me, some people left, and there was no more food. But I thought, what's the worst thing that could happen to me? I go back to Kuala Lumpur. I won't participate in the conference, and then I take my flight for where I need to go. But there we were. We were there, and what I learned, I was just a boy. When you when you think about the worst and you see that the worst is not that bad, you relax. And at that point, we were there and waiting and wait. We waited until night, and and then and then we were able to contact the one who invited us to Sri Lanka, who was a doctor and was friends with the prime minister, and he sent a fax, and they gave me a last minute 3-day visa for Sri Lanka, and I was able. I remember. I mean, I went upstairs to get some food. There was someone. They were there with rifles, these huge, and I went up just to get some potato chips and came down to eat. But it was a beautiful memory. But it could have been a situation lived very badly. But I lived it. I lived it like a game, like a challenge. Okay, okay. We had some fun, and at the same time, imagining, okay, the worst the worst isn't that bad. It's an experience that really could have gone. It could have been terrible as as a trauma. I mean, it could have really left some kind of mark on me, of fear and disappointment, trauma. But I mean, so there are practical things that we need to do, and then there's also an inner aspect of how we live situations. And at the end of the day, that the inner aspects are more important because the practical things can go well or they can go badly. But how we live an experience that lasts, and a, a lot of that comes from that attachment we have to how things we think should be, you know. So we say, oh well, um, what about the people I was traveling with? Why didn't they ask them to see their visa? Or, I bought my ticket. Why didn't the airline look for my visa before? I mean, I could have gone looking at many, many, many different aspects, but I'm convinced that in the life of each one of us, there are things that we would like to be different, or um, or that we think, oh, this person shouldn't be like this or shouldn't have done that. This is always like this, or someone who acts in a certain way that we don't think is good, and that will always be there. But let's remember that we face the practical aspects as practical aspects, but the inner way that we deal with things um, is the way that we deal with things is much more important. And and when we find that these situations are really difficult, this is a way to train. So I can generate a sincere feeling of love or gratitude or even at least neutrality. I mean, how do I face this situation? Here is where we need to practice and put into practice what we learn. And this it really takes this allows us to not have so much fear for the various situations. This is my theory. It might seem a little strange that one way to eliminate um, um, the eliminate the fear of something to is to be sure of it. Okay, so you say, oh, if something goes wrong, no, it'll go wrong. Be sure of it. We prepare ourselves before we take away that idealized image, and you know, so certainly something won't certainly something won't go well. Like if I start a new job and I'm worried, thinking, oh, if something doesn't go well, well, certainly something's not going to go well. Or if I'm starting a relationship with a new person, oh, I'm worried that something at some point is not going to go well. It's certainly something's not going to go well at some point. So we see that there are problems. There will always be problems, but we let go of that attachment to this idealized image of how things are supposed to be. And you're there, you see it, you smile and you face it. This is called also in certain texts the the patience, depending on the approach. So the patience or the effort that's similar to armor. So armor like patience or armor like effort. Like a soldier that goes to war. Why does a soldier put on armor? To make him to him or her more beautiful? No, because he knows he's going to take the blows. He knows that he's going to be hit. So it's not that the soldier goes to battle and with the first hit runs away. Oh, I got hit. No, he prepares himself before. He knows he's going to be hit. And that's why he puts on armor. And similarly, when we're in a situation and we imagine the difficulty before, also if when you imagine the worst, what actually happens is not so bad. When you prepare yourself before, um, you know, prepare yourself that in the sense that you're ready to face anything that happens. When you put on the armor, not only are you expecting the blows, but at the same time, you have faith in your own resources and your own abilities to to deal with those blows. If 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 I don't have faith in my ability to deal with being hit, I'm not going to go to battle at all. So I trust in my resources. Yes, there will be difficulties, but I have the means, I have the way to face these problems. This gives us some faith in ourselves. And to conclude this, we get back to that starting point. We go from the interference. We recognize an interference as an interference. I, it's an important term we need to remember. We need to see interference as an interference and not as something that should be followed. I could give 1,000 examples. So something, so there's I'm doing something, there's an interference, I recognize it as an interference, and I don't feed it, I don't follow it. We're, we have a good relationship, we have a harmonious relationship, something happens and something comes up and there's conflict. We don't follow that thing that has come up between us. It needs to be faced, but not followed. And energy needs to be given towards the harmony. So when is it that one follows the interference? When one is just overwhelmed and taken by the jealousy or the anger or whatever it is that's at the base of that conflict. No, it's an interference. We block it. We don't follow it. But getting back to that, to the starting points, we get the the fewer the fewer conditions that we require for our own happiness, the 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 stronger, more stable our happiness will be. For example, have you set up, conditions for your happiness? The people the people around you, for example. Normally, yes. If you say no, I don't believe you. We're 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 influenced. We're influenced by people around us. But if my happiness has to depend on how people behave, then I'm lost, right? And if my condition to my happiness has to be that other people around me are happy, that's even worse. Because tell me, it's like wanting to live in the world of Hello Kitty, where everything's fine and everything's always fine, everybody's happy and happily ever. I have a beautiful life, full of problems, but very happy. I have only to rejoice and to thank, really. But it's not that everything is perfect. So what happens is once a, once I set everyone else's happiness as a condition to my own happiness, then my happiness is incredibly fragile. This doesn't mean that we're indifferent to the suffering of others. It means finding one's own happiness, one's own balance, one's own love, stability, where there's joy when you see others happy. And when someone is not well, you want to help that other person and you do everything possible to help that person. But my stability, my balance goes beyond that situation. Otherwise, never, otherwise, one developing compassion on an altruistic level is a trap. If I can't be happy when I see others around me who are not well, and I amplify the my range of compassion towards others, it would just be impossible to maintain my stability. Compassion is not about suffering for the suffering for others. Compassion is found in acting and helping others avoid their suffering. One is indifferent when one doesn't act, one doesn't interact towards the, the happiness of others, or doesn't try to help others. If I see you suffering and I'm indifferent towards you, it means that I don't do anything. I don't do anything to help you from not suffering. Being compassionate doesn't mean that I need to suffer for your suffering. It means that I need to act with awareness to help you get out of your suffering. Is that difference clear? The fact that my happiness doesn't depend, doesn't have, is not conditioned by the mood of others, and doesn't mean that I'm indifferent to others' states of being, moods. I can be full of compassion, and when someone is not well, I do everything possible to help that person. I do everything possible to give joy, help that person be well. But this doesn't mean that my state of balance and wellness needs to depend on how other people are. And the greater my range of compassion at that if that were the case, the greater range of my compassion, the greater my suffering would be. And then what would happen that one would actually be closed off because they wouldn't want to see the suffering of others, because the suffering of others would make us suffer. So we so other people's level of happiness or moods as a condition to our own happiness is a huge trap. Or other conditions for our own happiness can be material situations, or that the situations always meet our expectations. Um, you know, the success of our choices. The, the, the more we're able to diminish the conditions, the things that condition our happiness, the more we'll be able to strengthen our happiness. I mean, for me to be happy, I need all these material things to be in this way. I need to be comfortable in this way and that way, and all the people need to act in this way. And for me to be happy, things need to be like this, and that needs to be like that. You know, yeah, it needs to stay like this. It's over. It's over. The first gray hair is a tragedy. Instead, when we have, when we have the signs of aging, it means we're alive. I mean, what's the alternative to aging? Is dying young. There's not too many other choices there. Oh, people say, oh, I I wish you a long life. Okay, well, at some point that long life comes, and we need gray hair, and the body decays as as the years go on. It's not that in the passing of time that the body becomes stronger. Fine. So it's all fine. So what are the conditions that we set for our own happiness? There's nothing wrong with taking taking care of our own appearance, taking care of our physical appearance, taking care of our health, having a stable, balanced material situation, um, enjoying sensory pleasures. There's nothing wrong with any of this. But I, these are extras. But if it has to be a condition for my happiness to have this like this and that like that, etc., etc., the more conditions I set, my own happiness becomes more and more fragile. The more fragile my happiness becomes. Unfortunately, one trouble that we have is that we get used to very, very quickly to conditions. Now we took this trip, and one of the jokes that I heard on the trip was, "What's what's the greatest problem in flying business class? Is that you can't then fly economy class anymore." In the sense that when you see the planes today, they're marvelous compared to the planes that I traveled on in the at the end of the 80s. I mean, if you want to compare those to the bus trips I took, it's luxury. It's also always a question of comparison. So at the end of the day, at the end of the day, happy is he or she who knows he's happy. And a great part of what we have, of our happiness or our suffering comes from satisfaction or dissatisfaction. And what determines w- whether we're happy or to satisfied or dissatisfied? It's not how much we have, but the value that we actually give to what we have. Because one doesn't one doesn't reach satisfaction by getting more. I don't know if you've ever tried to satisfy yourself getting more things, more attention. You know, it's not just material what we want. One one falls in love with someone else, and that person, oh, the person looked at me. Oh, how wonderful, how wonderful. I got a glance. After a while, oh, a few more glances. Oh, he caressed my hand, and then every day now that he cooks for you, you totally take it for granted. You know, and there are thousands of examples of this. I remember moments where there were people, different situations. It's a while it's not happening in front of me, where someone wasn't happy with me, not for something that I had done to this person, but the but the person for something that the person thought that I should have done but didn't do, and this happened often. Why did you do this? Why did you do this for this person and not for me? And I see also that attention that we give, that we receive, I mean, is it a lot or is it a little? It's all relative. What determines if it's a lot or a little? The value that we attribute to it based on a comparison. If we see it as a lot, oh, how wonderful. As little, then it's lacking. Mm. So our mind, it's just an amazing power over our happiness or not. And a key to being happier is being more satisfied. And to be more satisfied, we need to we need to thank to thank more and more. See the glass half full and not half empty. Stop complaining, not go in conflict for everything that happens. Now, I've just come back from Nepal. For those who were in Nepal, talking to different people, what was the most beautiful thing of what was the most beautiful part of this trip? I mean, it was really beautiful, beautiful places, beautiful people, and there will be others in the future. And many people said that the people was the most beautiful thing because the Nepali people have these characteristics. They're sweet, they're kind, they're sweet. And you can see this in traffic clearly because there's this traffic that is really chaotic, and sometimes two cars, bump, and then they wave to each other, they laugh, namaste, and they just go on with their lives. And you never see people fight. And it's not that there aren't conflicts. No, 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 you don't see any of the conflicts. We come from a different reality where our national sport is complaining and criticizing when we have so many aspects, marvelous conditions, and that's really nice, but there's a proverb in Tibetan, I don't remember it exactly. It says, any anything you say before but has no value. Oh yeah, the place is really nice, you're really nice, but no, nothing. Everything that was said before it has has no value. We destroy it with the but. Instead, rejoice, thank, see what we have, and say, oh, how wonderful that we have this. How wonderful that there's this other thing too. Marvelous conditions. And we need to allow ourselves to be happy, allow ourselves to be well. And to do this, we think more, we um, criticize less, create fewer conditions, for for our happiness, to have fewer needs for our happiness. It's like, for example, if you're traveling and there's a delay. Normally, what's the reaction? 10 hours late, delay. People normally get upset. What am I going to do now? Just live your life. If you're seated if you're seated on a bus or on a plane or in an airplane, it's not like you have to do 10 hours of uh, a 10 hours of, forced labor. Of course, there are more comfortable places. I would prefer my bed, but live your life, live the situation, breathe, meet people, face things to the best of your ability, and not be blocked and upset or rah 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 rah. No, okay, just enough. This depends on our own our own way of doing. And remember that we're made of habits. I've seen this with myself too. I'm At the beginning, I never used to complain, and then it takes just a minute. You start, you start. Someone complains, and to kind of to create some kind of connection with that person, you start criticizing, and then you see that person, and you just start complaining. That's what you do. No, no, no. Really need to be careful about this if we want to be happy. If we want to suffer, that's something else. Sometimes it seems I have this image of when I was a child. There was this cartoon, something like um, the road. It was it's just kind of a race with strange means. It seemed like it's like the more effort you put into being first, the then the more easily you were last. So it seems like we put so much effort into being happy, but but, but actually it looks like we're putting effort into to suffering. I mean, we know we know these things, so we criticizing um, and complaining. We know that this is negative. So put more effort into rejoicing. So, sometimes we complain about problems and we just put our hands up. Oh, well, it's not my fault. So we're ready to criticize what's happening, in politics and corruption. But then when it's up to us, if we can, take the easy way. I'm not talking about for everyone, but when you know okay, pollution and environment here and there. But then when we, as consumers, you know, um, okay, well, this one's cheaper. I'm going to take this one. No, we have to look at our daily life, act with joy, and stop criticizing, stop complaining, because life goes by. It's time goes by so quickly. I mean, it's just 2023, and before you know it, it's going to be Christmas. I mean, more we're almost there. So when we see that time goes by so quickly, we don't have time to waste with complaints here and the problems here and there. And no, let's let's allow ourselves to be happy, to rejoice, to feel joy. And one key, I repeat this one more time, is to thank, to rejoice, and create create fewer and fewer um, conditions, let's say, that determine our happiness. So, so let's remember also that regardless of all the effort we put into being well, sometimes we don't feel well. You know, a couple weeks ago, I told this story here in Kunpen. There was these days I woke up. I woke up on the wrong side of the bed. What do you do when that happens? You know, do you blame the world? No. Okay, okay. I woke up on the wrong side of the bed. How do you feel? I feel bad, but it'll pass. It's important to not be overwhelmed by that malaise and be and to follow it and get into conflict. You say, why do I feel bad? I don't know, but it'll pass. And then you go, you live the day, you go to bed, and then the next day, hopefully a little bit better, and and then one finds again, this positive attitude. But there are days where we just wake up on the wrong side of the bed. Um, you know, at a certain point, the day ends and one goes to sleep, and it passes, and everything's fine. I'm just going to repeat one more time. Let's try to rejoice, to thank, because we have so much to to rejoice for, to thank. We're absolutely privileged and lucky on so many levels. De- Depends on us if we allow ourselves to live happily or not. Of course, we're influenced. This is a, more or less what I wanted to share today to remind you that this weekend, Saturday, I wanted to dedicate Saturday afternoon to the practice of self healing, to explain the practice and do it together. And Sunday, there's the day dedicated to the introduction to Buddhism, and in the afternoon, the refuge ceremony. I thank you. I thank you for being here together. I'm happy that these weeks that I wasn't here and you were able to experience many other encounters. Geshe Lonsong Punsok, also Steve, who has a lot of accumulated experience in Buddhism, and I was very happy that other people could come and share their experience. At dawn or at dusk, at night or midday, may the three jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us to realize, to obtain all realizations and sprinkle the path of our lives with various signs of auspiciousness. Trashidile. Have a good evening. Thank you, everyone.